Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and good night, and welcome to the next video where I rant and ramble about the studio albums of Peter Hammill, where today we're talking about the three albums released between 93 and 96, which includes, of course, The Noise from 1993, Roaring Forties from 1994, and X My Heart from 1996. And yeah, the most notable thing that links these three albums together is it does mark the return of Peter Hammill operating in a band format, really the first time since the end of the K group. So all three of these albums are very much band albums. Really from Skin all the way through to Fire Ships. They're really solo albums. Whereas Hammill is kind of the main centerpiece, and there's guest collaborators that appear here and there, of course. But these three albums, it definitely emphasizes the band. There's a little bit more emphasis on the playing and the energy that's generated from a group of people in a room. This era is a little bit different from the K group, though. In the early '80s when the K group was active, that's very much a situation where the band was, operating as a band. So, they would rehearse together, they'd go into the studio together, and they would tour together, all as very much a unit. Whereas this era is a little bit looser. I mean, not musically, but more in terms of the band itself. In a live context, again, Hamill had been operating mainly solo for the intervening years. I think the '80s. There's a few shows that he does with John Ellis on electric guitar. Around 1990, he kind of puts together like a little chamber ensemble that features himself on guitar, voice, and piano. Nick Potter on bass and Stuart Gordon on violin. But by the time we get to '93, we're introduced to a new drummer in the Hamill universe, which of course is Manny Elias. Up to that point, most famous for his work with Tears for Fears. So when Manny Elias comes on board, obviously he's a very very different drummer from Guy Evans. I mean, Guy Evans is I suppose much more explosive, and his playing style influences the music. It's a very distinctive style, and it's a very exciting style. Manny Elias is arguably a little less exciting when it comes to the fills. He's a little less. A little more of a pocket guy. He kind of, he lays down the groove and he provides the songs exactly what is required to bring the most out of the songs. But his real skill is almost kind of disappearing into the arrangement, which is absolutely a valid skill. I don't want to sound like I'm knocking Manny's playing because he is a very competent drummer, and his drumming on these three albums that we're talking about. It is very, very good. It kind of takes you by surprise. If I really kind of focus in on the drum parts, um, you know, he does display, a decent amount of technique and certainly a great understanding of what the drums can do to create that tension and release within a song. And any drummer who's capable of playing with the idiosyncrasies of Peter Hammill as an artist is obviously worth his salt. So, yeah, Manny Elias is a very notable new player around this era. But like I said, when Manny Elias comes along, it's still the band isn't as tight a unit as the K group. So I mean, around '93, around the time that the Noise comes around, there's a very short tour that features a band that I think is referred to as the Noise. There's a live album that came out. I do not have it. I won't be talking about it. But there goes the daylight, and it's credited to Peter Hamill / Noise. So I'm assuming that's what the band was called. This lineup featured Manny Elias on drums, Nick Potter on bass, Stuart Gordon on violin, and of course Peter Hamill on voice, piano, and guitar. But this is very, very short-lived. Eventually, by the time I think it's around '94, the lineup does sort of coalesce into what becomes known as the Peter Hamill Quartet or PHQ. And again, it's a very. I mean, I almost hesitate to call this a band. It's more of an ensemble. It's more of that chamber sort of style because there's no bass player. The lineup for the PHQ is, of course, Peter Hamill, guitar, voice, piano, Stuart Gordon on violin, David Jackson on sax and flute, and Manny Elias on drums. So the absence of the bass does make it much less of a rocking sort of a thing. It is very much that chamber style, brought to a live format. That being said, however, these three albums, The Noise, Roaring Forties, and X My Heart, for the most part, are very much it's very much heavy rock that's the kind of simple way to put it. Peter Hamill does your heavy rock kind of thing. So it does create a very interesting little era. And like I said, it's a good run of albums, but apart from one of these three, I wouldn't consider them to be absolute top notch Hamill. But yeah, I'm a huge fan, so I like it all. So let's talk about the albums. We'll start out with The Noise, of course, chronologically. First album to feature Manny Elias, and the last album to feature John Ellis on guitar. So the lineup on this particular album is basically the K group with Manny Elias instead of Guy Evans. So yeah, of course, Peter Hammill doing his stuff, Manny Elias, Nick Potter on bass, John Ellis on guitar, and then David Jackson plays sax and flute. I don't think he's on all of the tracks, but of course his presence is always welcomed when it arrives. On the whole, though, I think that this album, it's one of the few, I guess, problematic albums. This is the follow-up to Fire Ships. It's also the first and only edition of the A Loud series. I mentioned in the Fire Ships video, he was kind of toying with this concept around the time where he'd release his quiet songs on a series of albums and his louder songs on another series of albums, and it never really worked out in the long run. And I think probably the contrast between Fire Ships and The Noise might have something to do with that, because if you see my Fire Ships video, I'm a huge fan of that album. I think it's got a beautiful flow to it, even though it doesn't represent the heavier side of Hammill. The total listening experience is just so great. It really takes you on a journey, and the way that there's the reprise in it, and it's just front to back a pleasure to listen to. This one doesn't quite have that journey element to it. It doesn't really have the peaks and valleys. This is basically just 8 heavy rock songs with varying topics. It doesn't really have a through theme lyrically. But all the songs are operating on this, pretty consistently intense level. And, I'm not really one to listen to songs in isolation, but, in this case, I think the songs are best heard in isolation. To listen to the whole album front to back is one of the few Hammill albums that I find is a bit challenging, because it doesn't really give you any room to breathe. It is a little bit, kind of flat. It hits that top level and it just stays there. But like I said, lots of individual songs are really, really good here. But yeah, I mean, if you were wondering, I mentioned in the video when I'm talking about the late '80s with In a Foreign Town, which is it seems to be consensus that that's his most problematic album. But I wouldn't consider In a Foreign Town to be his weakest. I think In a Foreign Town is better than The Noise. I'll say that. I don't think that's too controversial, because at least In a Foreign Town takes you on a journey, and there's some a certain degree of lyrical consistency to it, where this one is a little bit lyrically random, musically over consistent. But there's good stuff on here. We'll talk about the tracks. First we'll talk about the album cover, which again it's not one of his best. It really kind of drives the point home with the microphone and the big noise in the background. It's nice to see his handwriting again. That's first time in a little while we've seen that, so that's cool. But yeah, the songs on The Noise opens up with it's interesting for the novelty. The first track is A Kick to Kill the Kiss, and the novelty is this is kind of the closest Hammill ever comes to playing like blues rock, really. It is a shuffle, kind of a mid-tempo song. I really like the intro. I like the piano, or the left hand and the right hand are descending and ascending at the same time. That's kind of a cool thing that kind of also becomes the chorus. But once you get over that interesting novelty of Hammill doing kind of a bluesy thing, it doesn't have the staying power of some of his other stuff. Lyrically, I kind of get the idea. This is kind of talking about ego, and specifically how the ego deals with rejection perhaps. I can't go too deep in a lot of the lyrics on here. It's not that I'm not familiar with it. It's just I'm not. I've never been as invested with most of the lyrics on this album. But yeah, an interesting song. It's great that it exists. Not one of the best things he's ever done, but it's a polite, a friendly way to open the album for sure. Move on to track 2, Like a Shot, the Entertainer. Years ago, I used to like this song a lot more. I think it has kind of run a little bit thin for me. It is very fun. It's got a great hook to it. It's quite bouncy. There's some good Manny Elias drum parts on here. Like I said, I really do like the hook, that dun 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 dun. Lyrically, I think we're kind of, it's, again, I might be totally off base here, but I've always thought of the lyrics here as being sort of careering part two, but specifically dealing with one's career as in the public spotlight as an entertainer. Um, and the lyrics actually, they're not like your typical very intense Hammill lyrics, but there's some really fun lyrics that come up on here. I really love the "You're so hot, eggs are frying where you walk upon the street." I don't know why that lyric always gave me a giggle. There's a cool little like bridge section that changes the pace up a little bit, but like I said, on the whole, not one of the most memorable tracks on here. But again, it's good that it exists. It's a Hammill song, of course. It's good that it exists. But track three, we get to the third track here. Track three, we get "The Noise," the title track. Now, this is one of two songs on this album that I consider to be an out-and-out classic. And for whatever reason, I mean, people don't really talk about the song "The Noise" all that much, but I think as a vocal performance alone, I think his voice, this is probably the most visceral vocal performance of the 90's. Whether that makes it his best, I'm not really too sure, but damn, I absolutely love it. There's certain parts where it's just so intense. I love, towards the end of the last verse there, the "me on fire, me on fire," that part is absolutely intense. If there's something to be criticized, I mean, I guess it could be considered a little bit repetitive, but I mean, the themes are so great that that doesn't bug me too much. Great intro. I love that sort of pensive, creepy organ that comes in, and then once the song actually like kicks in, it goes into absolute overdrive. The arrangement on here is very much like a kitchen sink thing, and again, maybe some people would say that's like a criticism, like the arrangement is too dense, there's too much going on, it's kind of hard to wrap your head around, but considering the lyrical concerns, which is basically just the love of an intense musical experience, I think it works perfectly well. This could be like a distant cousin to Otto from In a Foreign Town, but this is Otto on steroids. Like, there's just so much going on here. Even with all like the synths and the guitars and the craziness, and then you get David Jackson's flute doing that. Like, it's a great piece. And like I said, best vocal performance. I like this song so much that it actually affected my speech and my mannerisms for some time. The big build up towards the end, where he finally reaches that maximum intensity and we get "power on." That became, just saying "power on" was like just a phrase that I would use. People would say like, "Have a nice day." I'd say "power on." I'm not sure if I still do that or not. I don't think so. But there was at least 2 or 3 years where "power on" was kind of like my go-to phrase for any situation in a conversation where I could say "power on" and it made some level of sense. That's what I would do. So, yeah, "The Noise" is a great song for me. One of the two absolute classics on this album, in my opinion. And I think it's underrated. It doesn't get talked about enough. It's kind of lost in the midst of all this other kind of hard rocking stuff. Anyway, we'll move on. Track 4, we get "Celebrity Kissing." Now, every time I listen to this album as like a through experience, this is where I personally start to suffer a little bit of that listening fatigue. Maybe it's because "The Noise" is so intense, the track before it, but this is where it's very obvious that we're operating at this intense level, and it's a fine song. I think it suffers from its placement on the album. It's a overall a pretty simple one, although there are some really clever key changes that appear on it. And yeah, it's okay. Good little highlight for John Ellis there. Lyrically, I'm not entirely sure what this is about. I think it might have to do with just the concept of celebrity and how people are attracted to that. I'm not really too sure, like I said, but it's got a fun enough groove. In an isolated listen, this is a fun thing to listen to. But context of the album, I find myself getting a little tired at this point. But overall, decent enough track. We move on to track 5, "Where the Mouth Is." Now this might be controversial. I'm not really too sure. This is one of the few Hammill songs that like maybe I don't like it. This is I guess. It's a bluesy kind of a stomp number. I mean, kind of similar, not similar to Kick to Kill the Kiss. Kick to Kill the Kiss has like a shuffle, but I think both of these songs, Kick to Kill the Kiss and Money Where the Mouth Is, both represent the closest that Peter Hammill ever comes to making like ZZ Top music. I love ZZ Top, don't get me wrong, great band. But do we want Peter Hammill doing ZZ Top? I'm not really too sure. Um, yeah, I'm honestly not a huge fan of this one. You know, the groove is a little bit lumbering, and it just kind of, keeps stomping along. You know, lyrically it's okay. It's kind of maybe a follow up to Sci Finance. We're talking about just the kind of corporate culture and all that, and white collar crime, da 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 da. But okay, probably it's possibly my least favorite on the album. Not too fond of it. So if you're a fan, I'm sorry. We'll move on to track 6, though, which is The Great European Department Store. Feels, again, it's not that I'm not a fan of it, but it does feel like a little bit throwaway. It does provide a little bit of levity on the album at this point. Like, it is a little bit lighter than the rest of the tracks. There's a nice little bit of light social commentary on there. Obviously, we're talking about consumer culture this time. I kind of like it. It's kind of fun. Like, the main melody, if you like, almost resembles like a jingle that you would hear on the radio. Do 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 do. Even like the double sax intro, which is great double sax intro there by David Jackson, of course. But yeah, it's okay. I think there's probably, I keep comparing a lot of the songs on here to other tracks on in Hamill's career so far, but this almost reminds me. It's kind of like a follow up to painting by numbers, and that we have kind of a deliberately cheesy sounding song, but that cheesy sound is set forth to inform the lyrics, which, in that sense, it is a successful song, but maybe a little bit of a throwaway number for me, not the most memorable. Cool little bass line though. I like that. Doom, do, do, doom, do, 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 do. I'm not sure if that's a sequence thing or if that's Potter playing the bass, but in any case, the bass line is cool. Move on to track 7. We get Planet Coventry. Now this is where the album starts to kind of take a bit more of a serious tone. While the album is on the whole a little bit less experimental, the songs are generally lighter lyrically. It's not one of those very intense, beat you over the head kind of Hammill albums. But the lyrics and the music on this particular track, Planet Coventry, definitely bring an air of seriousness to the proceedings, which that's kind of what we expect from Hammill. Really cool time signature. This is in 15, I'm pretty sure. We got a bar of 7 and 2 bars of 4 that come afterwards. Great Manny Elias drumming performance on here. This is where that he is a very competent drummer, even though he's not flashy, he doesn't show off, and he doesn't have that kind of explosive Guy Evans thing. He knows what he's doing, and he's playing exactly what the song would call for. I do enjoy the lyrics on this song. It's kind of talking about not really stage fright, but just that experience of being on the spot with an audience and having nothing to say, and just that moment of shock and panic and whatnot, which is a pretty cool Hammill topic. I think Hammill himself mentioned. I'm not sure if it's the newsletter that came out around this time, but it's a song that could be played either in like a B column or an A loud format, whatever that means. There's some live performances by PHQ a year or two later, and it's very much in the lighter vein, and the song is great that way too. But definitely a good song, one of the better ones on the album. Not what I consider to be an out and out classic, but it is a good song. Probably comes a little bit too late in the album, but it is what it is. Now, track 8. This is where it gets very, very serious, to the point that this track 8, Primo on the Parapet, it almost feels like it belongs on a different album. Like musically, it does follow that kind of heavy vibe, but we're dealing with very, very serious subject matter on here. Of course, this is a tribute to Primo Levi, who was a Holocaust survivor, and very, very intense lyrics. Musically, I think this is certainly kind of the closest to like an epic. This is more of a traditional epic for Hammill. There are kind of multiple sections to it. I think the big build. There's 2 kind of build up sections I think are really, really strong. Particularly the last one where it gets really, really heavy. We get the distorted guitars come in, and that whole like, here's a toast to Primo, let's learn not to forget. and this is the other out and out classic, I would say. This has had a very long lifespan in the live repertoire, and for good reason. It is a very good song. It just, in the context of the album, it feels like it doesn't belong, because it's so lyrically, it's such a touchy and serious and somber topic that it just feels like it's in a different universe. Even though musically it does fit the bill, um, it feels like its own thing. But in any case, a very good song, and great way to wrap up an otherwise sort of confusing album. So there's The Noise from '93. That means we move on to the next album. This is the one that I think is the best of these three, and probably the closest to a Hammill classic. Roaring Forties. This is a very good album, in my opinion. This is where the whole concept of doing like quiet songs and loud songs as different album series kind of falls apart, because we really kind of get the best of both worlds on here. There's a lot of good heavy stuff, but there's a lot of lighter stuff on here as well. And particularly the big epic on the album, which is A Headlong Stretch. You couldn't, this wouldn't fit on a calm album or a loud album, because it contains fantastic examples of both formats that he works in. So this effectively destroys the concept of B calm and A loud. Lineup wise, it's not too different. I mean, I think that it's kind of frustrating. It doesn't give you just like the core band, but there kind of really isn't a core band. Like if you go, I'm going backwards. Like the last track here is just Hammill and Manny Elias on drums. We do get the first case where it's just a straight up Peter Hammill quartet song. The epic Headlong Stretch is just the quartet on its own. So that's Hammill, Stuart Gordon, David Jackson, and Manny Elias. Nick Potter is on this album. I believe this is the last time Nick Potter appears on a Hammill solo record, so that is certainly notable. There's a keyboardist at one point here, or an organ player by the name of Simon Clark, who I'm not familiar with, but he does appear on one track, which is kind of cool. And so I remember when I first got this album, I had very high expectations, because there's only 5 songs on here, and we got the 20-minute epic. We got a song that's 9 minutes long, a song that's 8 minutes long. I figured this is like a return to doing Van der Graaf epics and these crazy arrangements and whatnot. And really, there's only one epic on here. It's just a Headlong Stretch. The big 20-minute one is the only one that I consider an epic. The other songs, while they are much longer, they're longer because the musicians have an opportunity to kind of stretch out and play. The arrangements of these songs are, they're not constricted to fit any sort of format. So the arrangements do kind of breathe and flow a lot more, and there's certain decisions that are made, like certain outros, certain intros, that give the album the opportunity to flow. And I think this album flows much better than The Noise. It's kind of a return to Fire Ships, in that we're presented with a total journey. We start in one place and we end somewhere else. In this case, the album starts out in very, very dark territory, but by the time we reach the end, it's hopeful. There's a light at the end of the tunnel. I think that the album experience is seeing the light at the end of the tunnel and making your way to it, and then you reach your freedom at the end, I suppose. But it is a great album. One of my favorites of the '90s. I've already said that about Fire Ships. I think it could be one of my favorite albums in the entire. One of my favorite albums, not my absolute favorite. I couldn't pick a favorite, but this is very, very strong. It's almost, if not damn close to being on par with Fire Ships, but very different in terms of music and arrangement. I like the album cover quite a bit. I'm not entirely sure what we're looking at here. The sort of explosion, this weird explosion of another dimension or something. I do like the map at the bottom here, which kind of demonstrates the Roaring Forties, which of course it's a wind current that goes around Antarctica, which is kind of a cool title for the album. Also kind of self-referential. Hammill was, of course, in his 40s when he recorded this, so I think that's probably fairly obvious. But let's talk about the tracks. So opens with Sharply Unclear. Very dark album right off the bat. I love it, or very dark song, I should say, right off the bat. I really love those arpeggiated minor chords. It's a very slow tempo song. It's very brooding. It's very yeah, I don't know. I don't think menacing is quite the word, but there's a heavy melancholy to it, and I think that that fits the lyrics perfectly well. Lyrically, we're kind of talking about we're talking about identity again, and it's kind of a cool concept. And one as a righteous young man, I was probably guilty of. It's kind of analyzing the differences between our own self-image, what we think of ourselves, versus how others around us perceive us, I suppose. And that line is very very dark. So sharp you could cut yourself. You've kind of wrestled your own self-image to such a point that you've become completely detached. And I think that melancholy fits it so well. I mean, it's talking about like an outsider who's watching this person kind of get lost within themselves, so to speak, and they're mourning the loss of that person. And yeah, powerful stuff. Stuart Gordon puts together an amazing performance on violin. It's not that it's all that technical, but there's the middle section where it's just that which is kind of very abrupt and jarring. But as the song winds its way to the end, those jumps that the violin does, he's definitely like you. He's definitely layered it to create kind of a quartet. But do 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 do, so sharp you could cut yourself. That ending section with the violin is so powerful. It gets you, and it gets you where it counts. You know what I mean? And it's a fantastic song. As it winds its way down, I really love the outro to the song, where it's kind of this mournful, kind of piano bit that kind of, fades out, which leads beautifully into the next song, which is, of course, The Gift of Fire. This is the first one, the first long song that I was expecting, this kind of big epic, to take place. And maybe it's almost an epic. I'm not really too sure. It's got a very long intro, which again is really good. You kind of need that going out of like the slow, mourning of Sharply and Clear. You need something to transition into what becomes a pretty upbeat, catchy song. Really, The Gift of Fire's got a great hook. I love the sax playing. That and then the band just kind of gets into a groove. Although there's no bass player on here, I'm assuming it must be Hammill playing bass, and Nick Potter's not on this track. This is where we get Simon Clarke, who I don't know other than what he contributes to this song, but he plays some kind of cool organ on the choruses. And yeah, it's cool. Again, like the players do get a chance to kind of lock into a groove, and I really like how there's a couple of points where like the song sort of falls apart on itself, and then that hook comes and it brings you right back in. I think that's really really cool. Lyrically, we're still in pretty dark territory. There's a lot of I think of like witch hunts almost. Talking about a female protagonist who gets herself into some trouble with her sharp tongue, and we think we've certainly seen similar things happen in the world lately, where all it takes if you say the wrong thing, you're gonna get canceled. This is almost like a premonition to the cancel culture that we see in the world today, which is kind of interesting. This is ahead of the game by at least 25 years. So that's quite interesting, and the lyrics that concern burning at the stake, like I said, it's quite dark, but yeah, cool. It's a cool sort of cool song about a witch, I guess. That's the oversimplified term, where I'm really dwelling on the metaphors here, but yeah, Gift of Fire, great track. I'm a fan. And then we move on to track 3, the very cleverly titled "You Can't Want What You Always Get If You Haven't Got It Yet." I love the title. Obvious reference to the Stones, which is again quite appropriate, because again we see Hammill operating in sort of a blues rock format. But I was a little disparaging on the blues rock stuff on the Noise, but I think it really works here. And surprisingly enough, I remember I was kind of flabbergasted the first time I heard this, because it's 9 minutes and they're basically just jamming on this kind of real basic kind of bluesy riff. But you know what? I absolutely love this song. This is one of my favorites on the album. Maybe I'm crazy. I mean, I don't know how many people they really give this song, too many accolades, but it's just so unique in Hamill's catalog to have, a song of just jamming, basically. Um, and this one we get the full band is on here, so it's a Peter Hamill quartet plus Nick Potter. You got to have a bass player for a song like this, of course. And the playing on it is just fantastic. There's so many moments where Stewart is just absolutely ripping on the violin. There's some amazing sax work by David Jackson there. And then Manny Elias and Nick Potter just holding down the groove so well. This is another one that kind of falls apart and then reassembles itself a couple of times. But just a great song. Great lyrics as well. Kind of, I think this is dealing with expectation. Is probably the simplest way to try and put all these words into one word, all the lyrics into one word. And I mean, I won't get into the details, but again, I was a young man when I got this album, and I was kind of going through my own sort of silly personal teenage trauma, whatever it might be. And this song really actually kind of got me through it. There's such a resounding optimism to that ongoing groove of this song, and hearing Hamill ranting, "I want doesn't get." There's a great line in there that. The one you chase forever turns out to be the one you could have had, something like that. But in any case, it meant a lot to me at the time, and it still means a lot to me now. Great song on the album, and underrated. I really like it. Anywho, let's move on to track 4. This is the biggie, A Headlong Stretch. First time since Flight, since we've had like a really long form song. Like, there's been a couple of epics here and there, but this is the first time he's gone for like the song that verges on 20 minutes. So the obvious comparisons would be to Flight from A Black Box, and of course A Plague of Lighthouse Keepers on Pawn Hearts by Van der Graaf. And this is an interesting one. Listened to it recently, and I concluded to myself that you could there's certain objective parameters that you could attach to this song and argue that it is better. It has, a much more fluid arrangement. I think the song flows a lot better. I mean, I like how it starts in a really quiet place. There's a very, very gradual, crescendo until we get to, kind of the equivalent to a Van der Graaf Madness section where things kind of get disjointed and heavy and dissonant and whatnot. And then it works its way back down. I think the way that the themes come in and out is very, very mature. It definitely shows a mastery of composition and songwriting at this point. I love the song, but of the 3 main epics so far, it's probably my least favorite. And I think it lacks a certain edginess. Even it's got very round edges, and it's very smoothed over, and it's brilliant. It's put together absolutely brilliantly. Don't get me wrong, but you're never gonna beat the sheer visceral torment of something like A Plague of Lighthouse Keepers, or the audacity of Flight. 1980, where Hamill's kind of scrambling to put his solo career together and kind of figure out what he's going to do, and then basically in his basement puts together this multi-part suite. Just the sheer audacity of that gives it a certain quality. Whereas I think he's more comfortable at this point. And again, I absolutely love the song. I think it is fantastic, but it doesn't quite have the edge the other really long epics do. But there's lots to like on it. I mean, lyrically, this is really a journey through life. And again, I keep talking about when I first got this album. I was a young man, and being like I was 18, 19, whatever I was when I first heard this, and your whole life is right in front of you, and you hear a song like A Headlong Stretch. Oh, absolutely. Again, it hits you where it counts, right? But there's lots of highlight moments musically. The main theme that's at the beginning and the end is great. There's almost kind of a trace of some of that 80's production sound. I couldn't tell you what segment it is. I don't know the song by segments, but when it kind of starts to build up, there's kind of traces of that 80's production, which is fine. I've never really disliked it that much. Does get to the real great kind of dissonant part is really, really good. I think that's called the 12. The real highlight for me, though, of this track as a whole is the operatic section, which comes in after like the heavy part. And Stuart Gordon is layering some beautiful violins to create that kind of quartet. And oh, Hammill doing the opera style is just so fantastic. Another reason I should probably pick up Follow the House of Usher, I'm sure. But that transition to go from that heavy bit back to the intro theme is just absolutely fantastic. I really love, that where he's kind of really harping on that point, return to base. Fantastic. Absolutely love it, and it's a Hammill epic. What's just because it's I would consider it a little bit lesser than Flight or A Plague of Lighthouse Keepers. It's still a Hammill epic, and it's still fantastic, and still one that I consistently enjoy to this day. And then how do you finish off an album after that, the headlong stretch experience? Well, the only thing you can do is put Your Tall Ship at the end of it. This is a beautiful little number. This is again, this is more of like a one of the Be Calm songs. Like this would something of this style would fit very comfortably alongside songs on Fire Ships, but it is very much its own thing. This one is just Hammill and Manny Elias, so Hamill's kind of doing everything, and then Manny's giving the backbeat. Some really big drums towards the end, which is kind of funny. That's kind of an odd production choice there, but it gives the song a bit of a marching feel to wrap things up. Lyrically, I think this is. I mean, I get a sense of homecoming on this, really, but I love the imagery. Again, we're as the title implies, where we're looking at, I picture tall ships on the horizon, but unlike Fire Ships, the title track from that album, where I picture, all these ships, as souls careening over a sea of fire. This is very much, you're coming back to a safe place after a long and arduous journey, and it wraps the album up beautifully. This would certainly be the classic of the album in terms of live performance. This has been his live set for pretty consistently for a very long time, and for good reason. It is a beautiful ballad, and wraps the album up quite nicely. So there you go. This is of these three albums, this is my favorite one. One of his strongest of the 90's for sure, and one that I had come to appreciate. Like I said, the first time I heard it, I was kind of like, what there's just jamming. Where's all the cool proggy bits and whatnot? And it doesn't need it. It doesn't have to be crazy and proggy. It's a journey. Even though we got 5 songs, it takes us on a trip, and you feel good by the time you get to the end of it. Anyway, we'll move on to 1996. Now, at this point, the PHQ lineup, or Peter Hammill Quartet, is firmly established. The lineup on this album, X My Heart, is just the Peter Hammill Quartet. So we get Hammill, Stuart Gordon, David Jackson, and Manny Elias. Loads of overdubs on this, of course, though. It is still very much a full band sound. Although the most notable thing here is this really marks the return of the acoustic guitar, which we've seen. It pops up sporadically after the 80's, but there's more acoustic on here than there's been in a long time in Hamill's solo career. So that kind of gives it a distinctive flavor. I know this is a really treasured album by a lot of fans. I think it's light years above the noise, I would say, but it's not. It doesn't quite hit me personally the way that Roaring Forties does. I'm not sure, for maybe just a headlong stretch or whatever, but there are some absolute classics on here. It's funny, talking about headlong stretch. When I first heard this, I tried to collect the albums as chronologically as I could. My first reaction to the flow of this album, because again, it does have a very nice flow to it. It's almost like he used a headlong stretch as a template, because this album does, it begins and ends on the same theme, same song actually. One's a cappella, one's a full band arrangement, but obviously you know that if you're watching this video. But it has that beginning and the ending, and it starts out kind of quiet, and it ramps up, and then it winds its way back down. The only difference, of course, is that we have a beautiful ballad kind of right in the center of it. But that does create a journey, right? It does create that flow, which is kind of becomes the standard of Hammill albums around this time. And yeah, it's a very good album. It's one that I listen to fairly regularly, and I always enjoy it. There's a couple of songs that are kind of okay on it, but for the most part, it's still another run of classics. Um, Pretty cool album cover. I think it's pretty striking. You get the heart there and the cross over it. I've always wondered about the title, to be totally honest, and I'm not sure if anyone out there knows what how you say the title. It's most commonly referred to, I feel, as just X My Heart, but it could also mean Cross My Heart. I mean, at the time, I would have been 5 or 6 years old when this came out, and at least my memories of elementary school, that was a phrase that came around. Oh, cross my heart and hope to die. That was how you would like promise somebody something. So I'm not sure if that's the case. Um, it could be mark my heart. I'm not too sure. I mean, there's a tendency around this time where the album title always appears in a lyric in one of the lyrics at some point. The closest one would be Earthbound, where there's consistent references to my heart, but then is that mark my heart? I'm not really too sure. It's probably X my heart, but if anybody knows for sure, let me know. Yeah, so we'll talk about the tracks then. This video's got to be getting pretty long by now, so let's keep the pace up. Opens, like I said, with an a cappella track. This is the most distinctive thing about here, and I think probably the most important thing in the context of Hamill's career is that this is where we really see him, experimenting with and achieving something very special with the background vocals. Obviously, like the lead voice is direct and center in the sound stage, and but the backing vocals, they do all kinds of cool stuff. It's not just providing like a backing harmony to give context for the main voice, but they are doing their own kind of little melodic runs here and there as well. And I think he develops that further and further and further to the point where by the time it gets to the albums in the 2000s and the 2010s, those backing vocals are just such an essential part of what he does. But we really see him start to expand on that in this album, particularly with the a cappella Better Time. Lyrically, this is kind of a celebration of nowness. I think there's Hammill interviews where he talks about the song, and it celebrates the greatness of now, both as there's never a better or worse time to be alive than now, but now is all we have. This is all we know is what is now, right? We can't go back, we can't go forward. All we can do is be in the present. And I think the lyrics do a pretty good job of conveying that, so quite cool. This Better Time is very much I would say is probably the classic of the album in terms of the live performances. This has been performed live many, many times. Not always a cappella, though. Moving on to track 2, we get Amnesiac. This is another classic of the album. This has got another one that has a lot of live representation. I remember when I first got into Peter Hammill and I was watching all kinds of YouTube videos. So many live videos of him performing Amnesiac, and I always thought this was like an older song from like the 70s. But no, it's, recent. This is 96. We're almost 20 years ago now. Almost 30 years ago. What am I talking about? But yeah, it's in the context of his whole career, it is one of the, I guess, more recent songs. And it's very good. This is where that acoustic guitar, returns. I love it. I love it. There's a lightness to it, even though it does have a full band arrangement. The verses are very light, very sweet. I love how explosive the choruses are. We do get the electric guitar kind of hitting some chords to fill out the sound. I think that's really, really, really good. Lyrically, dealing with memory, particularly memory loss, and I think the lyrics achieve something real special here, where he really captures the kind of the fear and the uncertainty that one might experience if they realize there's holes in their memory, and there's a pleadingness to it, and I think that's really strong. It creates a really strong character, and yeah, it's a classic bit of Hammill, isn't it? Good song. Move on to track 3. We're kind of continuing on with the theme of memory here. This is Ram Origami. The acoustic guitar disappears for a little bit. This is very much a keyboard song. Very slow tempo. There's kind of creepy little patches that come in and out. Like I said, we're back on the theme of memory, but it's a different context. Now this is kind of it's a memory/identity song, and it's kind of discussing how in terms of our own self-image and what we think of ourselves, we can only rely on our memory of who we think we are. Which again, classic bit of Hamill, but maybe it could be maybe a slightly lighter take on sharply on the topic on sharply unclear. Um, on the whole, though, it's an okay song. This isn't one that really sticks out with me. I wouldn't call it forgettable, but it doesn't match up to some of the other stuff in his career. But it's okay. Nothing wrong with it. We move on to track 4, A Forest of Pronouns. This is one of my favorites on the album. As I'm sure you know by this point, I tend to like the more experimental, crazy bit side of Hamill. And Forest of Pronouns is very much that. I kind of get the idea this is one of those things where he was just messing around in the studio, and of course the other band members come in and they apply their own magic to it. But it's one of those. I think it's one of those found songs. It's another reference, a subtle reference to the '80s production. We get that programmed bit of percussion, that that tune percussion thing. I'm not sure what it's. Some kind of like a dampened vibraphone or something. I'm not really too sure, but there's a great menace to it. I love the vocals, particularly in the chorus. And again, we're seeing Hamill really play with the backing vocals here, and that the chorus is basically two different, contradicting vocal lines that interweave and overlap over each other, but there's no singular voice, and that's a really cool technique. And again, that's something that he develops further and further as he goes along. It's a great song. Lyrically, this is this kind of he's always talked about language and communication, but he gets much more in depth with it, a little later on, particularly with Incoherence, and there's songs that were released after that where he's really dwelling on communication or lack thereof, miscommunication. And I think this is a good example of him really kind of articulating that topic. And it is really cool. And again, that those two vocals that I mentioned on the chorus, it really kind of demonstrates that lack of communication, because you can't decipher what he's saying, because there's two different vocal lines that are taking up the same amount of stereo space, which is cool. It's a great song. There's a cool live version that comes out shortly after this when he does the Union Chapel concert with Guy Evans. Obviously notable for the first public performance by Van der Graaf Generator in many, many years, and sort of signals the way to the reunion to a certain extent. The live version on that album is interesting. It's not as good as the studio version, but it's great that he would attempt one of these weirder songs live, and doing it with Guy. Did I say Stuart Gordon? I mean Guy Evans is it's the Hamill Guy Evans show. You already know this Union Chapel concert. Blah 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 blah. But only one of those experimental situations would they be able to recreate a bizarre song like this. So yeah, Forest of Pronouns, very cool. We move on to track 5. This is one of the highlights on the album. I'm not sure how much this song got played live, but this is Earthbound, and this is one of the best love songs he'd put together in a long time. I almost imagine this is this is a song that is as good as Vision, but written with the maturity and experience that only someone in his 40s could conjure up. And it's just it's so poetic. There's a very stately quality to the music. I love the piano theme that comes in after the main chorus. There's some it elaborates itself a little bit when we get the beautiful strings by Stuart Gordon to kind of accentuate that little passage, that dun 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 dun, very haunting. Lyrically, I think it's absolutely fantastic. I love the metaphor with gravity, and we're all bound to the earth, but in that perfect state of love, you can feel like you can defy gravity. I think that's kind of the main idea. But I'm using all my crappy words to try and describe something that is really truly beautiful. So you check out the lyrics and listen to the song on your own, and you will find it very uplifting. See what I did there? Uplifting and gravity and earthbound. I'm trying to be funny here, but I love it. Great song. One of his great love songs. I think it's quite underrated. It's under discussed. Earthbound. I do find the end of the lyrics quite confounding. There's the heartbreak, the anagram he sings, and then there's this kind of cryptic line that comes up about Hero Dan or whatever. I have no idea what he's on about there. If anyone does, if anyone has managed to break the anagram there, please do let me know, because I've always been puzzled and fascinated by that. But yeah, Earthbound, very good. Possibly one of the best songs on the album. For me, it's either Earthbound or Forest of Pronouns, but Earthbound is so special. We move on. We get to track 6, Narcissus Bar and Grill. Not surprisingly, this is a song about narcissism. Lyrically, it's probably not one of his stronger songs. It is, it is a little bit on the nose, a little bit too obvious for Hamill. Hamill's great at, writing songs like Swiss cheese. There's lots of holes that you could put your own kind of perspective into it. And I find this song and the next song are maybe a little bit too direct in their lyrics, but minor criticism. It's Hamill lyrics. It's still far above your average lyricist, I would say. Musically, though, this is a really, really fun song. I think it's funny. I mentioning the K group. There's actually no other members. Nick Potter's not here. Obviously, Guy Evans isn't here, and John Ellis isn't here. But there's certain parts on this song that really it reminds me of the K group. I'm not really too sure why. There's kind of an angular, fun sort of quality, particularly when it builds up and you get that doom 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 doom. There's something kind of K groupy about that. I'm not sure why I think that. It is unique in that it is kind of a rocker song, but it is it's mainly the acoustic guitar that's kind of taking charge rather than the electric. That build up is a real highlight, though. I love as the song builds up and it gets more and more chaotic. There's some really cool flute that kind of adds layers of tension to it, and then once the vocals kick in and that classic lessons to be learned segment, and then Manny kicks in with the double time on the snare. That's a really epic moment for me. I think that's really good. Yeah, so definitely a very enjoyable song. I like Narcissus. It doesn't seem to be one that's talked about too much. I guess I can see why, but it suits my taste. I'm a big fan. We move on to track 7. We come to Material Possession. It's probably the closest to being an epic on the album. It's not the longest song on the album, but like musically, it is very grand. Stuart Gordon is really gets a great highlight on here. I love those dramatic themes that dun 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 dun. I think that's really really good. There's a few different sections to it. I think there's a real nice mix of light and shade here. Lots of great dynamics. There's some quiet bits, there's some heavy bits. There's a great kind of solo section where the band kind of lets loose a little bit. That bump a diddle doo, doom doo doo, bump a diddle doo. I think that's really really great. Again, lyrically, they're good lyrics, but again, it's maybe a little bit over direct, uncharacteristically direct for Hammill lyrics, talking about material possession. And all the tropes that kind of go along with that. There may be like a continuation of that consumer culture criticism that's on here. But I like how the lyrics kind of round up to conclude that only flesh and bone are the true material possessions. The only things we really own are the bodies in which we inhabit. Everything else is kind of fluff, so to speak. But musically, like I said, it is still a very, very strong song, very dramatic, very very intense at times, and great highlight for Stuart Gordon. Now we move on to track 8, which is kind of the final new song on the album. We get Come Clean, and this is where the album is starting to wind down quite nicely. This is kind of like the opposite end of Amnesiac, which there's a certain Amnesiac is pleasant, but there's a tension because we're dealing with memory loss, whereas Come Clean doesn't seem as tense to me. This is more about kind of opening communication and cleaning the slate, so to speak. And it's very pleasant. I don't think there's really that much for me to say about it. I wouldn't call it one of my favorite Hammill tracks. This has gotten some live representation. There's a live version of this on the Not Yet Not Now box set, which is really really cool. It's nice to have some live representation of this album. And yeah, it's really about. I guess it's a pleasant song about honesty and feeling, and openness. And there's a trace of darkness. I like the line towards the end, like maybe what I mean's this is as clean as it ever gets. Like we can never be totally open, because that's just not possible by the way that the human mind operates, I suppose. But I love that section. I like it's very stately again. I love the violins there. It represents a nice sort of a nice peak to the song, and yeah, it's all right. It's not one of my favorites, but I'm glad that it exists. And then the album wraps up, of course, with a reprise of A Better Time. This is the full arrangement, although it's not really a full band arrangement. This is, more sort of, more the piano is kind of, the piano and voice are the main stars here. There's some embellishments that come along to go on top of it. But it is quite literally a repeat of the acapella, the A Better Time acapella version, just with piano and a slightly different arrangement. It's a good song to do a bookend with because it celebrates nowness, and it's a nice way to kind of tie the album together. I'm not sure how much of a fan I am of having to having the song repeat. I get it. It's a he was bound to do it eventually. But yeah, I don't know. I've always been by the time I get to the album, it's okay. Well, we'll hear A Better Time again. That's okay. You know what I mean? I'm not sure if I need to hear it twice when I have a listen, but it's a great song. Like I said before, this kind of is one of the classics of the album. There's lots of live versions of this, and it's been in his live set for quite a while. And yeah, wraps up the final album of his kind of band trilogy of the 90s. And really, he never quite goes back to any full band albums after this. Obviously not counting Van der Graaf Generator or what he did with Isildur's Bane many, many years later. But in terms of his solo albums, this is kind of the end of the band format. He'd operate in a solo capacity pretty well exclusively. Well, I shouldn't say that. Not quite yet. There's still lots of guest contributors that come in for the next albums of the 90s and in the early 2000s. And there's 2 or 3 songs here and there where he does kind of the band thing, and he does assemble the musicians to create a band song. But yeah, this is it for the full band album. So there we go. I hope that wasn't too long. I'm sure my viewers would watch this in segments. If I watch long videos on YouTube, that's how I do it. I'll try to remember to put timestamps on here so you can get from one album to the other. But I'm not sure why I'm telling you this at the end of the video, because who knows? My brain is just is melted from making it through this far. And if you made it through this far, thank you so very much for listening. I'm glad you're enjoying it. I'll probably do some more Hammill. Well, I'm definitely going to finish the Hammill series, but I might switch gears for a little bit, do something a little bit different. I've been thinking about doing like Deep Purple or something like that, just to so it's a little easier to talk about Deep Purple than some of the Hammill stuff, I suppose. And if doing that gets a little more viewers on the channel, then that would be good. And if I get more viewers on the channel, I'll talk about something really out there, which of course would be cardiacs. But all stuff that I'm thinking about, and we'll just see what happens. As ever, thank you so much for listening to my rambling and raving and blah, 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 blah. And at some point, you will see me in the future. Take care. Thank you.